We're ready.
So if I say hello, Liz, she's there, huh? She can hear me?
Okay, I guess it's time for us to start. I'd like to welcome everyone to the September 2021 meeting of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, it was founded in the year 2000 with the goal of gathering, preserving, and celebrating the history of our neighborhood. For many years, we had held live meetings on the second Tuesday of every month, but due to the COVID pandemic, we've had to temporarily move them online using a Zoom platform. As soon as it's safe to do so, we'll be switching back to live presentations. At this point, it's hard to predict exactly when that'll happen, but we're hoping it'll be sometime after the new year. We're currently preparing a membership drive for the new year. If you know of anyone who might be interested, please refer them to our webpage. The year's membership's only $15, and it would make an excellent holiday gift. As part of membership, they would receive a monthly newsletter packed with articles and information about the neighborhood. You'd also have access to the 20 years or so of monthly newsletters. You can also read about other projects we're working on, such as the preservation of the Neil Log House and the various walking tours we expect to conduct next year. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge some of our officers, board members, and volunteers that make this all possible. We have our co-president, Jim Hammond, Vice President Helen Wilson, and our board of directors, Jeannie Binstock, myself, Toby Chapman, Audrey Glickman, Jim Hammond, Tony Indovina, Stanley Klein, Todd Miller, Helen Wilson, and Evelyn Young. President Emeritus Michael Urban, who headed the group for many years. As a lifetime resident of Swissvale and Squirrel Hill, I can remember what Pittsburgh was like in the past. You could look over the hillside in Swissvale or over here by the Homestead Bridge and see a vast collection of factories and mills. But time marches on, and most of these factories have been demolished. One of the few remaining facilities, the old Carrie Furnace and blast furnaces located along the Monongahela River in Swissvale. That'll be the topic of tonight's presentation. It's formerly part of the Homestead Steelworks, and they operated from 1884 until 1982. It's been designated National Historic Landmark. With us tonight for the presentation is Mr. Ron Barrow. He's Director of Historic Resources and Facilities for Rivers of Steel. Ron's a Pittsburgh native who served as a Director of Historic Resources and Facilities for Rivers of Steel since 1998. Last, I'd like to mention it, everyone will be muted here because it causes distraction. At the end, when we start the questions and answer, you'll be able to talk again. So with that being said, let me pass the mic on to Ron.
Well, also, we're recording.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Now
Yes.
I have to be really careful what I say, right?
Yeah, we are recording this for our own use.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you folks for having me. You know, after a year and a half of doing Zoom meetings, you would think I would actually love it, but I hate it. I would much rather be there in person with all of you and talking with you and seeing faces as I talk. It's much easier. But I thank you for coming, no matter what forum that's in. Let's make sure I can get this to work. Here we go. There we go. All right, that's my lovely smiling face. As Wayne mentioned, my name is Ron Barrow. I'm Director of Historic Resources and Facilities for the Rivers of Steel. Started there in 1998 when, like a good Pittsburgher, I rolled back home. I grew up in this region. I actually grew up in Squirrel Hill, so I have a emotional attachment to the neighborhood, and happy to talk with all you folks. And I literally grew up in the shadow of the mills. All these places were working when I was growing up, and where we first lived was on Fernwald Road, and right across from the slag dumps. And I would go and ride my bicycle on the slag dumps and play over there. Then I moved over to Phillips Avenue, but Squirrel Hill and Pittsburgh and the industry was just a big part of me. And no matter where I lived and what I did, I was always a Pittsburgher, and it never escapes you. I left here right after high school and went out to the Northwest, figuring I'd never be back. But again, Pittsburghers have a way of rolling back home. I came back in '98, was brought into Rivers of Steel to help set up their museum and archives division, and more importantly, head up the Carrie Furnace project. And I've been fortunate, to be working on that site and with the organization since then, and we've come a long way. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to pop through some stuff, if I can make sure that works. Okay. I'm not going to get into, I know a number of you are going to go on the tour or have been on tour. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the technology and how all those things work. It means much more when you can see it. But I'm going to talk about why we do what we do and what we're doing and how we're going about it to preserve the site and promote the site and where the site is at currently. As I mentioned, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I grew up in the shadows of the mill, surrounded by the history. My father before me and his father, that my family came here originally in the 1850s, but the Baraff family came here in 1905 from Baku, Romania. And when they arrived here, it was something very different than what they had known. And while my family didn't work in the industry, it was a pull factor for them. And really, unless your family arrived here after 1980, we're all connected back to this industry. It's what brought us all here. But the Pittsburgh they arrived to is very different than the Pittsburgh we live in now. Very harsh, very dirty. That picture in the lower right-hand corner, I'm sure some of you have seen it before, but that's Pittsburgh at noon. Okay, industry was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. For 125 years, this region really was in the vanguard of steelmaking and industry. We set the standard for what happened through the rest of the world, and what happened here was unparalleled and groundbreaking. You had folks coming from all over the world to create a new life. This is actually a sign from the Homestead Works. You had different nationalities all coming together, but all really trying to do the same thing, which is chase the American dream. However, by the 1980s, that era of dominance and prosperity came crashing to a halt as Pittsburgh ends up moving into this era of deindustrialization. Folks left the region in droves. Again, I was one of them. Left here, and I never thought I'd be back, but really the region never left me. And I was always a Pittsburgher. But what was happening here really changed the face of the landscape and the mindset in this region. This was a place that was exceedingly proud and reliant upon the industry that took place here. And when it came crashing down, and it wasn't overnight by any means, but it felt that way for the folks who lived it. It felt like everything was stripped away. But it's from the ashes of deindustrialization that our organization, Rivers of Steel, was born. And it's really born under this premise that if you tear it all down and you take it all away, you're taking away our ability as a region to tell our story, our history, to use our heritage and our culture to find not just who we were, but who we are presently and where we're going in the future. That these sites that were the economic drivers for so long, though they were changing, could be that economic driver again. Which brings us to our story of the hour, which is the Carrie Furnaces. As many of you are aware, the furnaces actually sit in Rankin and Swissvale. There we go. There's a shot there. And they were connected after 1898 to the Homestead Works. Now, the first blast furnace was brought in. I'll give you a kind of brief history with it. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But the first blast furnace was brought onto the site in 1884. It was actually a failed blast furnace from Port Washington, Ohio. And it was brought in by barge, unloaded, and reconstructed at the Carrie Furnace site by a couple of brothers, the last name of Phones, and a gentleman named William Clark and the Park brothers. These folks were all former associates of Andrew Carnegie's in the iron business. And as Carnegie moved away from iron and into steel when he opened up the Edgar Thomson Works in 1875, he invited a number of these partners to come along with him. Some did, others didn't. And some of those folks spent the rest of their lives trying to compete against him. And I'll give you a little insight here. Almost every one of them failed, and he ended up with their mills. The thing to remember with Andrew Carnegie is he built one mill, and that's the Edgar Thomson Works. As I said, opened in 1875, still operating today. It's the only fully integrated mill left in the state of Pennsylvania. But what he did is he acquired this vast empire. So the Phones brothers try to compete against him. They do fairly well at first as operating as a merchant iron mill, meaning that they made iron to be sold on the open market. They do fairly well. A couple of years later, they open another blast furnace, eventually put in 106 coke ovens. But by the 1890s, the era of operating as a merchant iron mill is gone. That the era of big steel was here, the era of large corporations was coming in, and smaller entities such as this couldn't survive. So they made a decision at that point to get out of the business. And they sold the property to the Carnegie Steel Company in 1898 for $750,000, which in today's money is about $22 million. The Phones brothers, as some of you may know, actually took that money and invested in some property in Oakmont and built the Oakmont Country Club. So they're actually far more famous for golf than they are for industry, but that's how they got their start and made their fortune. So after 1898, the Carrie Furnaces were connected to the Homestead Works across the river. Now, Carnegie didn't build the Homestead Works either. He acquired them in 1883, and he was lacking a direct iron source. So he needed the Carrie Furnaces to really succeed and grow. And what ends up happening over the next 100 years is that, or almost 100 years, is that the Carrie Furnaces and the Homestead Works become the most dominant steel mill and facility, not just in this region, but in the country. And it's from those furnaces that the iron that became the steel that literally and figuratively built America and created that American century through the 20th century. The Empire State Building, the iron came from there. The Panama Canal gates, the USS Missouri, the Sears Tower, the Bay Bridge, on and on. I mean, it's endless. So this mill is vitally important to the history of this region. You had this great expansion through the early part of the 20th century. So Carnegie acquires this place. There's two furnaces there. They're about center in that upper image. Then between 1900 and 1907, builds 5 new furnaces. Those furnaces were the high tech of their day. So when someone tells you that Pittsburgh has reinvented itself and that, we're now this high tech corridor, I'm here to tell you that we've always been. It has been the mindset in this region, for being on the cutting edge of ingenuity and innovation. And the furnaces in their day were just that. They set the standard for what would become America and the world's manufacturing. It's all put in place there. However, as the 20th century rolls along, you run into some problems. And those problems are really 5 main things in no particular order. What ends up happening is that you have companies, in this case, US Steel, which Carnegie Steel becomes US Steel in 1901. Carnegie Steel not reinvested in these plants. So this is a shot of the Carrie Furnaces in the early 1980s. What you're seeing there, furnaces number 6 and 7, shortly after they were taken offline, and they were taken offline in 1978 because Carnegie Steel, or in this case, US Steel, wasn't reinvesting. These furnaces were last upgraded in 1936. So they were trying to run 50-year-old technology and compete against the rest of the world. So it's lack of reinvestment by the corporations. There's changing environmental law, which is directly impacting these plants, and going back to the fact of they're not reinvesting. There's changing technologies, meaning, something as simple as more plastics, more alloys coming in, but also the way that iron and steel is being made is changing. Doesn't require the same amount of people. Now, you can make the same amount of steel with about 10% of the workforce that you could 100 years ago. There's also foreign competition at that point that hadn't really existed previously. As many of you remember, the big competitors through the 70s and 80s were Japan and Germany. And why is that? Well, in World War II, we destroyed their infrastructure. We took out all of Japan and Germany's iron and steel, and then proceeded to rebuild it under the Marshall Plan. So they had newer facilities, which goes back to reason number 1 of no reinvestment on the end of the US corporations. And the last piece being management and labor issues that all tied in. So these 5 things together led to what appeared to be a rapid decline, but really was over a 20-year period, that by the 1980s, these mills all up and down the river, not just Carrie Furnaces, but all up and down the riverfronts here, were being closed. Homestead, which at its peak had 15,000 people working in it. And that peak is the end of World War II through the early 60s, but 15,000 people working there. In the end, was 340 people. So in 1986, the Homestead Works closes altogether. 2 years later, the property is sold by US Steel to the Park Corporation. Park, based out of Cleveland. The kind of PC name for what they do are remediators, or the real life title would be scrappers. They came in and they purchased the totality of the Homestead Works, about 420 acres, in prime riverfront property, and they paid $12 million, which is nothing. But they also bought all the liability. But it's at that point that they started dismantling the mill. And it brought in the reality that the work was gone for good. And it was from this reality that Rivers of Steel was born. And, as I mentioned earlier, it was out of this notion of if you tear it all down and you take it all away, you're taking away our ability as a region to use our history, to tell our story, to drive economic revitalization through tourism, through reinvestment, et cetera. So we started at that point trying to save the site. This is a map of the Homestead, or the Carrie Furnaces in 1944. It's a vast complex. This side of the river alone was about 110 acres of iron making. 9,000 tons of iron a day were coming out of there. And now it's all shuttered. The shaded area is what is left. And as an organization, we focused on that area for a simple reason, in that they were the last of their type. Carrie Furnaces number 6 and 7 were the last pre-World War II blast furnaces left in this country. Now, there are furnaces that are older, but they have been upgraded. The furnaces at the Edgar Thomson Works are chronologically a couple years older than the Carrie Furnaces. However, they are modern blast furnaces. As I mentioned earlier, Carrie's 6 and 7, the last major upgrades, 1936. So what you're looking at is a plant that was primarily hand operated, was by the 1980s completely inefficient, but in its day, the apex of the industry. This is what the property looks like now. That's what's left. So we started trying to save all of this, as I said, in 1988. However, we could never reach an agreement with the Park Corporation. And there's a number of reasons behind that, but the biggest reason really was they were concerned that a small nonprofit would not be able to maintain the site, and that they would be on the hook for all the liability with it. So what they were hoping for, and what we were hoping for a time, was the participation of the National Park Service. There was a push for a number of years to have this site become a national park site. And we came within one vote at one point within US Senate of getting that, but it failed. But that doesn't mean you give up. You keep pushing. So by the mid-2000s, it became very obvious that we were not going to be able to strike a deal with the Park Corporation. So we ended up bringing in the Redevelopment Authority of Allegheny County, who was quite interested in this property because it's the last great brownfield that there was no vision or plan for beyond what we were proposing. They saw this as a big opportunity. So in 2005, the property, the 110 acres, which includes a little sliver across the river. And we then entered into negotiations with the county to manage and run the historic portion. So out of that 110 acres, we got 35 acres. In 2006, the site becomes a National Historic Landmark. And as obvious as it seemed to us that this should be a National Historic Landmark, it took 10 years to get that designation. It's a long, slow process. Preservation is a long, slow process. You have to be incredibly patient and persistent. So 2006, that designation happens. However, we don't get boots on the ground until 2010. By the time we work through all the process with the county, we get all the lawyers out of the way, it's 2010, and we are now 22 years into a site being left dormant. Now, I hesitate to use the word abandoned, which is often used with it, because it was not abandoned, as you'll see in a few minutes. It wasn't abandoned from an ownership standpoint, and it wasn't abandoned from an activity standpoint. But what ends up happening is an encroachment of human interaction and nature. You can tell from these photos how overgrown everything is. So the site moves during this period from being a place of work to a place of exploration for graffiti artists, for urban explorers, for folks who want to build, giant pieces there, Liz. People coming in and discovering this, dormant factory, this dormant facility, and it's otherworldly to them. If you didn't work in one of these plants, you didn't go in. And to be able to go in and walk through and climb on the structures and interact with the site it really was a feeling like wandering, through the Amazon and coming across ruins. It was very otherworldly. And it was, in many ways like being stuck in an MC Escher drawing. Stairs going every which way. It was completely fascinating, but there were still, clothes in lockers. There was stuff everywhere. And it was hard to keep people out. You can see the extent of the graffiti there and what happens. So really it becomes this whole new world. I'll just kind of pop through some of these pictures so you can see. This might look familiar to a few of you. In 94, and Liz, I apologize if I have the year wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's 1994, a group of artists come in and are exploring the site and construct this amazing piece in the Blowing Engine House, which leads to another piece that we'll get to in a few minutes. But this is the type of thing that was happening there. It became a whole new world. It was operating not as a site of work, but as an aesthetic. All the while, we're figuring out how to get in there, how to work on this, how to preserve it. All right, so as I said, in 2010, we finally get keys to the place. And our first goal really is to kind of get our arms around this and figure out how do we start restoring something that has 22 years of degradation happening, has become let's call it an attractive nuisance in many ways, that people come in and climb around and do whatever they want. We have to change that culture. While I completely understood why people were coming in and what they were doing, it was also really important that we gain some control. Part of the problem we had was with folks coming in and stealing anything that wasn't nailed down. And even some things that were remarkably hard to steal, they still managed. So one of the first things we had to do was stop the scrappers. There were very few fences left on the site. It had been breached so many times that you can really walk in anywhere. There were times I would show up there, on a Saturday, and somebody would be rolling out with a truckload of steel that they stole from there. So we had to get that under control and kind of change that culture and get people to understand that this was not an abandoned site. This was not a scrapyard, but it was a nationally important and a national historic landmark, something that needed to be preserved and needed to be treasured. So the first thing we did was, stop the scrappers. And that's fairly easy. You bust a few of them, you let it be known, you get it in the papers, and you start repairing fences. So we're able to do that. But there's other elements that we weren't able to control right away. But what we were able to do, finally, is start doing tours of the site. So we began those in 2005 and 2006, but took a break while the lawyers were sorting things out. But in 2010, we started conducting tours on a regular basis. Originally, it was just on weekends, and the folks who would come were almost always locals, folks who grew up in the shadow of the mills, folks whose fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and grandfathers worked there. And this was the first opportunity for people to get in there and see this place and get up close and personal with the life that their family led. What we have discovered since then, and as we've grown, is that now that is a much wider reach. We have people coming from all over the world for our tours. We now run tours May through the end of October. 5 days a week, June, July, and August. In May and September and October, we do them 3 days a week. We do a lot of private tours, and they're almost always sold out. But if you quiz the folks who come on tour, which we generally do, and ask who's from the region, it's probably less than 50% are local now. They're coming from all over the country and all over the world because they want to see what made Pittsburgh great and where this happened. The other thing that's happening is our demographic is skewing younger, which is a wonderful thing. Instead of 45 and over being the average age, we're now seeing a lot of folks between 18 and 35 coming in that are attracted to this. So it's really great promise. It means that this isn't a relic of the past as much as it is a hope for the future. So, which brings us to the Carrie Year. Leading up to really the mid 90s and just a bit later, our focus when we talked about preserving the site was really on the structures and trying to envision a way that we can restore the site, have it look like it would have looked during its heyday, and to kind of let people see it in that light. It was really a very strict historic preservation approach. However, as part of this new incursion into the place, and I don't mean incursion in a negative way, but exploration of the site, along came this artist that I mentioned earlier that originally built the owl inside the building, which was torn down. But they came back in 97 and 98 and built an incredible piece made entirely out of objects found on site. Worked on it for about a year. And it's the Carrie Year, which for us changed the way we looked at the site. It changed how we saw what the site can be. It really kicked the door open for understanding that the arts and kind of that urban experience all can be a big part of what we're doing here, that it can allow us to expand the scope of how we see the site and really think out of the box. The deer, by its very existence, kicked the door open to a whole new reimagining of the site and has allowed us to explore new ways to bring people in and new ways to engage people at the site. I am a historian by trade. I think everybody should know their history and love history, but I also know that not everybody does. And not everybody wants to come and see a blast furnace. But if you give them other reasons to come, if you open other doors for them, they will come and see artwork, they'll see the deer, they'll see other things that are going on. And once they're there, I've never, in all the years that I've been doing this, had anyone say to me, boy, this place is horrible, I don't want to know any more about it. So the ability to think outside of the box is really kickstarted by the presence of the deer. I also want to thank Liz and all of her compatriots for constructing it on a non-contributing structure. As a National Historic Landmark, the site is divided between contributing structures and non-contributing structures. The easy way to look at it is anything built before 1936 is considered a contributing structure. Anything after is non-contributing. The deer head happens to sit on a building that was built in the 1950s. So that meant that we didn't have to take it down. As you saw earlier, there was a lot of graffiti on the site. And that was another thing that we really had to get control over, that people were climbing all over the historic structures and in the process, breaking the structures down, painting on the structures. And really, it's always been a great concern of mine that I don't want to find anybody hurt there. I have a pretty simple rule, no one's allowed to die. I'd like to keep it that way. So, we had to figure out a way to get our arms around the urban art and graffiti that was happening there. Why were people coming? Well, they were coming there to paint because they loved it, because it was remote, because nobody would bother them. So, originally the approach we took was very similar to what we did with Scrappers, which is to try to catch people. And, there were days that I would get 18 to 20 folks coming in with backpacks full of paint, and I would confiscate the paint from them and do all of that, but that's not going to stop it. That doesn't solve the problem. So in 2012, I was really looking at other options of what we could do and how we could maybe create legal wall space, figure out ways to partner with people, to stop folks from breaking in and to get people working on the same page as us. And it just so happened that a guy came on tour one Sunday. I happened to be at the site cutting down trees, and he took the tour with a tour guide who was one of the folks who used to work at the mill. And he was peppering this guy with questions about the graffiti. And our tour guide just looked at him at one point and said, "I don't know anything about the graffiti. I don't care about the graffiti. Ron's here somewhere, go find him." So at the end of the tour day, the guy came and found me. We started talking about graffiti and how we felt about it and where I saw it fitting in, and really kind of how I felt about it. And I told him, look, there's some amazing pieces here. There's also a lot of junk. There's a lot of tagging. It's very cluttered. I would really like to keep it off the historic structures. How do we go about this? Well, it turns out that's the guy in this picture. His name is Shane Pilster. He is a longtime graffiti writer who's originally from the West Coast, but came to Pittsburgh a number of years ago, and like many other graffiti writers, found the Carrie Furnaces and fell in love with it. But he also understood that for graffiti as an art form and for artists to succeed within that art form, that you needed to bridge the gap with folks, that it couldn't just be seen as destruction and tagging. And there's much more to it than that. So he had, prior to even meeting with us, had started, programming on his own, doing graffiti workshops and classes with local high schools. And as he and I got to talk and we understood that we had very common ground, we formed a partnership. And, we set aside 2 legal wall spaces. The upper picture is one where he's painting on, that's in the ore yard. Another is inside the powerhouse, where we allowed people to come and work. And what we have asked is that folks don't break in, they don't come on their own. They contact us, we'll let them come in and paint. I don't care what their real name is. I don't care about any of that. I just want to be able to work together with this. So it took a little while to get going. We still had people breaking in for a bit, but now, knock on wood, we've had no illegal incursions for a number of years. People get it. They're able to come there and paint. And that opens yet another door and more avenues for people to come in. Another approach that we took was dealing with the incursion of nature, where you've got a site where nothing grew. Like a lot of Pittsburgh, it was really denuded through the years by industry. However, once the work goes away, nature starts coming back and trying to reclaim the site. We were doing our best to kind of hack our way through all of this, but there were areas that we couldn't get machinery into, and that we were having a hard time maintaining the landscape and keeping it off of structures. So what do? Well, we started taking a more critical look at it, very similar to what we did with the deer head and with the graffiti, is understanding that this is change that happens over time. It's an important part of the site, an important part of the story of the site in the post-industrial age. So if you can't beat it, you join it. So we started a program called Addition by Reduction, working with a botanist named Rick Dark, who happened to find us when he was in town working on falling water. he and curator Falling Water and some others rented a helicopter and we're flying around Pittsburgh, just getting a sense of what Pittsburgh looks like from the air. Flew over the Carrie Furnaces, and Rick was like, "What is this place?" And Ann Talrak, who is one of the curators there, said, "Oh, that's the Carrie Furnaces. If you'd like to go there, I can arrange it." So she called us. Rick came in, and I took him around the site. And I was talking to him about this constant struggle we had with nature, and that it was almost impossible for us to overcome it. So there had to be a better way, very similar to what we were doing with the graffiti. And he helped us work through a plan. And what we realized collectively was that what we had originally viewed as a negative was a positive, that we had a living laboratory happening at this site, that it was a great case study in how nature reclaims industrial sites and reclaims sites that have been badly polluted through the years. So it was showing a series of what's called succession, how it comes back, how it can thrive, how it can reclaim, and how it can clean the environment. So that started a whole new program with us. And along with that, we entered into a partnership with Penn State Master Gardener Program to do interpretation on the site, and created an iron garden. So it's a garden area in the furnaces, industrial gardens that we put plaques in that we cast on site that interpret the flora and fauna of the site. So again, another door to open to bring people in. Along with the graffiti arts programming that we do, there's also a rapidly growing metal arts program. Matter of fact, there's still people on site right now taking part in a workshop. We do things, from casting aluminum on site for what are called doodle bowls, where people can come in, do their own design in a sand mold, cast aluminum into it, and take these pieces away. These are a couple-hour program that we do once a month between May and the end of October, that we sell out as quickly as we announce them. But it's a way to engage people with the site and with the arts and with that tradition of metalworking in this region. We also cast iron on site. We have workshops. There's a cast iron workshop going on presently. It's a week-long program that will culminate with a major casting event this Saturday, where we, in the shadow of number 6 furnace, where at its height they were producing 1,250 tons of iron a day in a much smaller cupola furnace, we're able to cast over 1,000 pounds of iron. But it's seen that process, understanding how it works, how a furnace works, what you can do with that iron, and the beautiful artwork that can come of it, that is really continuation of the art that went into iron making in the first place, that you can be hands-on. We can have the public participate in this. And it's exceedingly successful. We also presently have a program going on called Alloy Pittsburgh. It is a program we started in 2013 that brings artists in, emerging artists throughout the region, though we've had some from outside of Pittsburgh, who are doing site-based work. And the inspiration for all of this is the deer, and how the industrial site can influence and inform new works of art. So we did the first one in 2013. It's meant to be a biennial, so we did it in 2015, had to skip a year, and then because of COVID, we had to skip another. It is up on site right now through the end of the month, but it's allowing artists to come in and be incredibly creative within the space. Actually, the picture from the lower left-hand corner is one of the current pieces. The artist is, his name is Bradford Mumsberger, and he is a fashion designer. But he created this absolutely incredible homage to the greens that the steelworkers wore. It's huge. But it really plays well with the site. And again, it's bringing new voices, new interaction to the site. We also have a lot of different events that go on there. Things that are really, again, increasing our audience, allowing us to bring new people into the conversation, but it's also, quite honestly, a way for us to bring money into the site. If you try to exist on historic tours alone, as much as I think we should be able to, you're not going to survive long, plain and simple. You need to do these other things. So we have weddings on site. This started, about 6 years ago. But we have a number of them every year. Actually, we just had a wedding last Saturday where there were 250 people there. So it's, an interesting use of the site. 2 weeks ago, we had Beers of the Berg. They've been there for the past 5 years, minus the COVID year. But this event brought close to 2,000 people into the site, many of whom had never been there before. So it is exposing the site, exposing the surrounding communities to people who might not have come there otherwise. And they invariably want to come back. We also do a yearly festival, which had to be canceled last year and this year because of COVID, called the Festival of Combustion. So it's taking the idea of hot arts. So it's casting iron, casting aluminum, glass work, ceramic work, welding, etc., and really putting on an amazing festival where folks can come and spend the day and participate in all of this, and bring new audiences. We do tours, etc. We have been running with the last 2 years the Carrie Carpool Cinema. It's something that we had talked about for years, but with COVID going on, we were trying to figure out new creative ways to get people into the site and also allow them space. Projecting movies onto the side of a rather large building proved to be a great way to do it. Our shows last year sold out before we even announced what they were. We also played host to the Democratic National Convention, the Pittsburgh contingency of it. As you can see, that's what's being screened on the side. And it's proven to be really successful. Venture Outdoors has held the Banff Film Festival there the last 2 years and will again. So again, it's a collection of people who may not have thought to come to this site otherwise, but are drawn by the attractions. We've also had numerous other events, including King Lear being staged there. We've had a number of movies shot there, Out of the Furnace, Concussion, number of TV shows. The newest one, actually, I think just premiered a couple days ago, and that is American Rust with Jeff Daniels. They shot quite extensively there. I will tell you that we've never had a romantic comedy film there. It's always, some sort of horrible, death and murder, but hey, I guess we're typecast, but they keep coming. And it's a great backdrop, and it's really a good revenue source for us. Number of TV shows shot there as well that are more documentary style. From Mysteries of the Abandoned, which is on Discover Channel, that they air constantly. And we shot it with them close to 3 years ago, and I had people almost every week showing up and telling me they saw that. So it has legs, it works, it brings people in. So these are all ventures that are really, really worth it, and a great avenue for us to promote what we're doing. We have American Ninja Warrior shot there. At least up through last year, it was their most watched episode. It was a lot of work, but it was really rewarding that people all over the world got to see this site and be attracted to it. Had the Thrival Festival there for 2 years, had 17,000 people there to see the show. Again, I know I've said this a number of times, but it's really important. The more exposure you can have to this site, the more people become interested in the site, the more they understand their connection to the site, then we're able to better do our job and promote it and bring people in and raise interest. Carnegie International use pieces from the Carrie Furnaces, and if you go to the Carnegie now, you will see photos of Carrie through there. So this is, not just an industrial site, it is a cultural site, and it pervades throughout this region. So what's the future? Obviously, what we're doing with tours and events, et cetera, but it's even more than that. I don't know if you folks saw the news a couple of days ago, and there'll be another release, I think, tomorrow. We just were fortunate enough to be awarded a Save America's Treasures grant, which is exceedingly competitive and really hard to get. But we did it, and it's a huge step. It's an award of $358,000, which has to be matched. So that means we now have $750,000 to put into restoration of the site, and that is vitally important to the long-term survival. We're also working on a comprehensive strategic plan, which will really lay out what the next 5 to 10 years will be with that site, and that should be wrapped up soon. Also in the news recently was the sale by the county of their parcels to the RIDC, which is the Regional Industrial Development Corporation. They're the same folks that have handled Duquesne Works, McKeesport, the old Westinghouse facilities in Turtle Creek Valley, and also in Hazelwood. So they have purchased or are purchasing the property and will begin development. This next one will give you a better sense. It's going to be done in a few phases. Phase 1, right here where the orange is going to be building on spec, hopefully to get a client in. But what they're really hoping for is partnership with the Pittsburgh Film Office to build sound stages. And what this will bring are thousands of jobs to this area. They're looking at high-tech warehousing, flex space, along with the film industry, which will really be a great economic boom to the surrounding communities, which is what matters. We will still be where we are. Nothing changes for us, except we get new neighbors. So I probably far exceeded where I was supposed to talk, but that's kind of where we're at with things. I invite you all to come and visit us and take a tour and see for yourself how amazing this site is.
Okay, thank you very much, Ron. Do you have time to answer a few questions?
I'm fine. As you notice, I will talk.
Okay.
No problem.
So, I was curious myself, where'd the name Carrie come from?
Here, let me get rid of my screen and bring me back up if I can.
There you go.
Carrie is actually a family name from the Phones family. Naming blast furnaces after women was pretty common practice. In this region, you had the Eliza Furnaces and Anne and Edith and Isabella and Lucy. So it was very common practice. Carrie was a sister of the Phones family. And so they named the Carrie Furnace complex after her.
Okay.
Hopefully I didn't put everybody to sleep.
Not because of him, because I'm just tired.
You did great, Ron. I always learn something
Oh,
every time
thanks.
I hear you talk.
You know, always good to hear you, Liz. As I mentioned in the beginning, Zoom's interesting. You know, it's hard to give a talk on Zoom because you can't see faces and you can't interact. So I look forward to being able to do these things in person again. And you should have Liz come on and talk about the year. That's what I think.
How come they didn't arrange a tour for Squirrel Hill Historical Society?
But why, but where are you going on Saturday morning? Yeah, that's who did it. He sounds a little out there to ask that question.
Well, they didn't mention it, that's why.
Well, I asked you if they mentioned it. You said no.
And yet you're asking it right now.
Ron will answer any questions you have for him.
Yep, absolutely.
No.
Won't hold back.
I am struck by your ability to reach out. It is remarkable what you've done. Hands off to all of you. I was there on a visit when you first had the deer, Art, and I can't get over how you've reached out and welcomed so many. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The reality of it is some of this was self-preservation. You know, I'm not gonna lie. You know, if you want to survive and keep the site safe and moving forward, you had to figure out a way to work with everybody. But more importantly, it's a way to bring more people into the conversation and expand that story and expand the audience. And I don't want to leave the impression that we are only inward looking. We try to look outward as well and work with the surrounding communities. As a heritage area, and I didn't even get into all of that, we cover 8 counties. And so we have partnerships all throughout Southwest Pennsylvania that are really trying to do that same thing of marrying community and place, memory and promotion, and all for the purpose of keeping the stories alive, the communities alive, and promoting this region and getting folks outside of the region and even those inside to know what we all know, that this is an amazing place with some of the most remarkable people and most remarkable stories you'll ever encounter. And we're proud of that and want to promote that and want people to see it and be part of it.
How many people are on your staff and how many volunteers do you have to help maintain the site?
Well, we now have more people on staff than we've ever had. I mean, when I was hired, there were 4 of us. And for a long time, there were 4 of us. Up until about 3 years ago, it was a core of about 7. We are now a staff full-time. We just brought 1 more person on, so we're full-time staff of 16. And part-time staff of, you know, with all of our tour guides, et cetera. Sorry about that. That's my computer making noise. With all of our part-time folks, that's another 35 people, I believe. But they're not all at the Carrie Furnaces. We have 3 other sites that we administer along with the Explorer Riverboat, which used to be River-Quest. So a lot of folks are connected to that as well. But for a number of years, and now my dogs are going to bark too. For a number of years, it was really myself and a couple of crazy volunteers doing things there. And Liz can attest to that. She remembers these guys. But now I have 2 full-time maintenance folks, along with probably about a dozen, you know, dedicated volunteers that come in and help us do things like cut the grass and take out the garbage and oversee events. But most of the structural work and preservation work is being done by 3 or 4 of us.
Can you clarify again? Carrie Furnaces is indeed part of the Homestead Works.
Yes, from 1898 on, it was part of the Homestead Works. It was originally an independent plant.
Are there any plans to open the Hot Metal Bridge to traffic or a walking trail?
Yes. So the Hot Metal Bridge, which was taken out of commission in 1982 and sat dormant for a number of years, was actually donated to Rivers of Steel in 2000 by the Union Railroad. We held the bridge until 2005 when it went to the county. So now it belongs to Allegheny County. The original plan of the county was to have it be a vehicular bridge as well as a hiking and biking bridge, kind of similar to what they did on the south side. However, that's not what's going to happen now. And I think it's actually a darn good thing, to be honest with you. To try to make it be a vehicular connector was just going to be completely cost prohibitive because of grade change on the Homestead side of the river. However, it is still very much in the plans and is probably within a couple of years of happening. It will be a connector to the Great Allegheny Passage. So from all those trails along the northern alignment that are coming out of Swissvale, coming out of Frick Park, coming out of Hazelwood, they'll be able to come in, traverse the site, and then get from the northern side of the river to the southern side of the river by the Hot Metal Bridge. That bridge, and I am biased, I know this, but that bridge is probably the most incredible bridge I've ever been on in my life. It was opened in 1900, and it was designed to carry such an immense amount of weight. And I know this is damning with faint praise, but it's probably in the best shape of any bridge in this county. And it hasn't been used for years, but it is spectacular, and the view is spectacular. And to be able to open it up to the public is something that we're all really anxious to do.
Good, good, good.
Sort of looks like it, doesn't it?
Congratulations on your grant, Ron.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing news. I'm super happy. You're one of the, that site was pretty rough when I was breaking in there.
Yeah, well, you think it was bad then at 30 years, and yeah.
Yeah, well, you're very tenacious and you're very persistent and you're inspiring. You've done an amazing work, and I recommend that everyone on this call find an event to go down to, whether it be the Festival of Combustion, one of the beer events, or a concert, or just the Carrie Carpool Cinema. You've done really well through the challenges of COVID, creating an outdoor space that people can be spaced out and still have an amazing experience. It's been like some of the highlights of my social life these past couple of years. So
yeah, right. And Liz knows.
I applaud you.
Thank you.
What you have done with that site is just so very, very impressive, and all of the energy that you brought around. So yeah, everyone needs to go on that tour or do another one. Support.
Well, listen, it's a lot of us who are really dedicated to it, including a number of you folks that understand how important it is to maintain this site and sites like this. But this is a story that is unparalleled in the history of this country and needs to be told and needs to be preserved. And Liz, you might have already seen this, but I colored it on my arm. So there you go. So that's called job security. Okay?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And on the subject of a tour, we are having a tour. We're leading a tour, bringing some folks, about 19 exactly, on Saturday to the Carrie Furnace site. So Ron, thank you and Stacy Drain for helping us arrange that. And if there are any cancellations between now and Friday, we'll let you know. But members, but if it will let you know by email. So if you don't receive any emails from us between now and the end of the week, that means there are no available places on the tour. But I'm sure it's something that we can do in future years as well, based on demand.
Right. Well, we look forward to having you there, and for me, this is an honor to be able to come and do this. And I am a Squirrel Hill boy, so it never leaves you.
He is?
Yeah.
Hospital where I go get healthcare. Why cannot hospitals? Let's take on a treaty relationship.
Well, thank you again, Ron, for
Oh, my pleasure.
your knowledge and your time with us. It's really quite impressive, as Liz said. Hope that everyone gets a chance to visit the site at some point if they haven't already.
Are there any future dates for tours expected that are open?
The tours go through the end of October. They're Friday, Saturday, and Sunday now. Yeah, you need to book them in advance.
Scenarios on the site, and they bring in all kinds of people. They're very successful. If nothing else, they even have.
Wonderful program. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, come and see us. We welcome you on the tour. We welcome you at an event. And there's a big motorcycle event in a week or two. So there we go. Expect to see you all there.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks again, Ron.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It was great.
Looking forward to seeing it on Saturday.
All right. Beautiful. Thank you. And thanks, Liz.
I'm not going to the block party, are you? Wayne?
I think this is earlier.
Okay. We'll see you after.
Okay.
Good night, all. Have a good week. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
See y'all.
Okay. Guess we can end the show for today.
Yes, stop the recording and save it.
All right. Well, enjoy the tour. For those of you going on it, we're still